This is a Film Stories original podcast.
We made this.
Welcome everyone to the X-Cast. The truth is in here. You're listening to our special Fight the Future Minute podcast. I'm Tony Black, still your host, and you are listening to our coverage of minute 110 of the X-Files Fight the Future. We're closing in on the end, guys, now, and this minute begins at 1 hour 49 minutes, precisely, as Assistant Director Jana Cassidy and Walter Skinner share a little glance, and it ends on 1 hour 49 minutes and 59 seconds, with Mulder saying no to Scully, which makes it sound a lot worse than it is. But it is part of a bigger line. And to help me unpick that, I'm joined once again by returning guest and X-Cast patron, Caredwen Foley. And it's nice to have you back for what is one of my favourite conversations of this film, Caredwen. I don't know about you.
Yeah, this is a really interesting one. We got a lot of meat on the bone here, even though it's such a short interaction.
So yeah, I mean, this whole scene. I mean, you've got the last embers of the Cassidy and Skinner glance, but we've talked about that, and that then takes us to the park in Washington where Mulder is sitting reading the paper, and he's looking at another example of the cover-up, which is talking about the hantavirus outbreak in Dallas, and it's just completely whitewashed, basically, and it's just an article talking about it's been contained, that the Federal Emergency Management Agency, good old FEMA, have got it all in hand. We're terribly sorry about the loss of... I think Stevie, the kid, gets a name check in here as well. He gets named as one of the victims, the boy who gets all the black oil in his head. And it's just it's a tiny little byline, like really low down on like page whatever, which is really, I mean, that's classic, isn't it? Just bury it like as a non-pit story in a newspaper.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting choice. I did a little bit of a deep dive on this one, because I think it's so interesting going back and watching shows from the 90s where they're not made with the assumption that anybody is going to be like screen capping anything or watching things more than once. So, you can see, like, if you pause it, that the same text is recycled. Like they write an actual article for this one, but then all of the articles around it are just, the same text over and over about like a recycling program.
I didn't notice that. They wouldn't do that in this day and age.
No, you couldn't get away with it. Yeah, you couldn't do it anymore. And actually, this here's one of the most arcane pieces of X-Files trivia I think I've ever encountered. I got curious about where this text came from, about whether like there were actual news articles that they'd kind of chopped and screwed to make this happen. And so I Googled a couple of the sentences, and the only reference I found was on an old Buffy message board that they were used as newspaper article like snippets in an old episode of Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
No way, really?
Yeah, so I guess Fox had their like art department or their properties team or something.
Yeah.
We're just taking some of the same text and remixing it.
You've got to be the only person who's ever found that out, Caredwen. There, surely.
Like,
It didn't look like it. It didn't look like there were any other web results from deep digging X-Files.
That's a great piece. That is a great piece of trivia. But it is true, isn't it? Like the age of pausing television and screen capping and things has changed the way we do these things now. Quite often you will get flashes of things that people have put incredible amounts of detail into on screen, and you'll only see that if you screen cap, or you pause it at a certain point. And I think that's fantastic. That's a real attention to detail that just immerses you into the world. Whereas something like this, I didn't even notice it was all cut. I bet other people have noticed that it's all just recycled, but it kind of takes you out of it in a way, doesn't it? If you do pause it, it's a bit like, oh, it's not actually a real newspaper. But it's a good little segment. It's also, one thing I noticed was that there is the person who's giving that kind of, basic quote about, oh, we're terribly sorry about the loss of these children or whatever, the surname of that person, you don't see what their full name is, but the surname of that person is Blackwood. Now, I feel like that's a nod to the fact that when Fight the Future was produced, the code name of the production was Blackwood.
You know what? That's interesting, because when I saw that name in the article too, and I knew it sounded familiar, but I couldn't place why. And yeah, that's what the reference was. That's great.
Yeah. That's got to be intentional, almost certainly, that they put that in there, and that they were having that Blackwood was on the mind, because that was what they were trying to call it, to throw. I'm sure we've talked about this before on the podcast, but that's what they used to throw people off, that this was being produced at all. That would never work in this day and age. They'd have like people documenting daily production and guessing, oh, what set is Mulder on, David Duchovny on now? What does that mean? All that kind of thing. But yeah, so that's an interesting little thing. Another thing from the article is that the piece is written by a reporter called Howard Dimsdale, and according to Frank Spotnitz, that is the name of his screenwriting teacher, which I think is a really cool little nod to somebody who really existed. So there is actually a Howard Dimsdale out there.
And Dimsdale also, he was on the Hollywood blacklist, I believe. From
was he? Wow.
Yeah, he had been. He was a screenwriter for quite a long time, and some of his screen credits were actually removed or revoked after the House Un-American Activities Committee convened and targeted so many folks in Hollywood who they believed were communist sympathizers. But yeah, I found an LA Times article about him. This is heartbreaking. He and his wife ended their lives together. His wife had a terminal illness, very, very serious disease. And he said that they couldn't imagine life apart. So really very, very sad end to their story. I mean, he was 78 when they died. She was in her 60s.
Okay.
But that was in 1991. So just a few years before Spotnitz started work on the X-Files. His mentor had passed away.
What a sad story. How sad.
He did return to writing under his own name in the early 70s. So, he hadn't had his career completely derailed, but it was interrupted for a time. But yeah, then toward the end of life, such a tough ending for them.
That's amazing. That's amazing facts, though. Again, I don't know. I've never heard that stuff before. I mean, as well, that he was investigated by HUAC, which we saw in the X-Files in Travellers, which was the season 5 episode with Arthur Dales in the 50s. And that HUAC is floating around in the background of all that with the communist witch hunts and things like that in early 50s in America, which is a fascinating period of history, a really dark chapter in America's political history. In which a lot of people were silenced, weren't they, for
things?
I haven't watched Travellers in ages. That one definitely could use a rewatch.
I really like Travellers. I'm a big fan of Travellers. I think it's underrated because it's sort of a bit alien conspiracy, sort of. I think it's this parasite thing that's inside people's chests or something like that. But it's great because it weaves in all of real life characters. J. Edgar Hoover's in there, Roy Cohn, who was a complete so-and-so, and all these people being real life characters weaved into the mythology of the X-Files. It's a really great piece of TV. I really, really like Travellers. It's well worth looking back on, and it gives you a little window into that history, which itself is fascinating. But what a shame, poor Howard Dimsdale. Well, it was a nice little nod to him then.
Yeah, it's nice that he got a little bit of a tribute, and that we know about him and are talking about him because of it. But
yeah, this whole sequence, the whole thing about this anyway, you mentioned that he was writing in the 70s and things. This whole scene feels very 70s conspiracy thriller to me. The setting itself. You could imagine Mulder meeting Deep Throat in this park at night. So it does have a real feeling that it's tapping into that area. And interestingly enough, there is a link to one of the classic 1970s conspiracy thrillers, 3 Days of the Condor, which is one of the most well-known thrillers of that decade. The decade of amazing, conspiracy thrillers. I didn't know this. I don't know if you did, but this scene was originally supposed to be Mulder and the Smoking Man.
I have no idea.
Yeah. Now I didn't know this until recently, and they talk about this on the commentary on the Blu-ray, the circa 2008-ish commentary. So there will be a lot of people who know this, but yeah, this was supposed to be the Smoking Man and Mulder, and apparently they couldn't quite recall it was shot. So William B. Davis shot this scene in this park with Mulder, and sadly, nobody's ever seen it, I don't think, or few people have seen it. But in this scene, the gist of it, from what they could recall, was that the Smoking Man is essentially saying to Mulder, it doesn't matter even if you try and get this stuff printed, nobody will print this truth. Nobody's going to print what really happened. They're just going to print what's in that paper, about how the hantavirus was contained and things like that, or it was hantavirus. So I think it was one of those sequences where Smoking Man saying, well, there's no point, Agent Mulder. That kind of thing. It is pointless, your quest. That kind of stuff. I mean, I love this Mulder and Scully scene, but I've got to be honest, I think that could have been amazing. Like a Mulder and Smoking Man confrontation at the end of this film.
I think that would have been really interesting. I think it would have been a really tough sell with audiences to end the film on such a nihilistic note, though. Like, especially if you're trying to draw people in who maybe aren't super familiar with it. They get to the end and they're like, okay, so all the evidence has been destroyed and the points, the task is pointless. Great. I think that where it leaves it is, feels like it's stepping into something instead of out of something. So it probably is for the best that they ended in the way they did. Although I think if this were a total standalone, like if this were detached from the series, I think that would have been a really fascinating ending. I've been thinking a lot about how, we like our endings in film in the US often to be really neat and tidy, much more so than I think maybe folks in other countries do, because a lot of films get adjusted for the American market to make them more like neat and tidy and to wrap up all the loose ends at the close, or to give them happier endings or things like that. And I think that the Mulder and Scully scene feels akin to that, but it also kind of feels like a necessity given that we're going back into season 6 now, and the events in this movie needed to give Mulder and Scully a reason to keep going. And if you ended on the cigarette smoking man telling Mulder, you don't need to keep going, this is pointless, you'd need another, a little note of Mulder feeling like, oh, that lights a fire under me even more. Otherwise, I think it would just feel too much like a closing a door. Like it doesn't yes and their quest.
Yeah. Because I guess your alternate sort of ending of this film could have been, in theory, you might not have had the Tunisia stuff that's come in, but you could have had the last time you see Scully is her walking out of OPR, and the last time you see Mulder is him and Smoking Man in this park. Maybe Mulder walks off and the Smoking Man is just there puffing his cigarette, watching him go. Maybe he screws up the newspaper and puts it in the bin. Something like that, some kind of... The way maybe an episode would have ended, that would have worked for an episode, I think. You could have ended an episode like that. But I think, and you're right, ending a movie. The reason they reshot this scene was that they said it was too confusing between Mulder and the Smoking Man, who otherwise don't get a scene in the whole film, I don't think. I think they come close to crossing paths, I suppose, in Antarctica, but they never quite do. So the Smoking Man's more in the background throughout this movie, but it would have been great in that sense of catharsism to have Mulder and the Smoking Man meet. But I think they went with the right choice. I do, and we'll talk more about this in the next minute in terms of what Mulder and Scully say to each other. But I think, like you said, it might have been too much of a downer ending, too much of and I think this is possibly what they were suspecting with this. In that, yes, it would have been nice and conspiratorial and X-Filey, but I think it could have just left things on a bit of a down note for a movie that's got to work as a told story. And I think that's kind of, it does work a bit more as a told story with threads left dangling if you have Mulder and Scully walk off hand in hand, Yeah, as I say, we'll get into this in the next minute because there's a bit more to talk about in terms of what they say to each other, because it ends with them in mid-conversation. So yeah, we'll leave it there for this minute now. Thanks for listening, everyone. And thanks, Caredwen. You're going to be back for your final minute of Fight the Future Minute to talk about Scully convincing Mulder not to give up, among other things. So it's going to be emotional.
Yes, I'll talk to you then.
All right, so until our next minute, guys, as usual, always remember, trust no one. Elsewhere on We Made This. The Movie Palace.
Yeah, I mean, that's the common consensus. It's a great film. It's one of Hitchcock's best. But like, what makes it so good?
Well, first of all, it's just such a good, well-crafted film. And the more you look at it, the more you see everything that's in this film is just so well constructed. And it has so many layers. You can just watch it on a story level, and it's just a very effective film. But when you start getting into the depth of the characters, especially Marion and Norman, and Norman's relationship with his mother, it gets very, very complex, and it gets very psychological.
I'm in a band podcast.
We should talk about that, because when we have our CDs made, we get 1,000 CDs, don't we?
Yeah.
Which costs approximately £1,000. And then we went to Germany and the Netherlands, and every single time we went, oh, where's your vinyl? Where's your vinyl? Do you guys have any vinyl? No, we don't. So then we have a load of vinyl made, right? And then they don't bloody buy it the next time we go.
Yeah, it's mad, isn't it?
Pull or pass?
And then within the first 20 seconds, nipples on costumes, backsides and crotches. I mean, that is a huge start. That's a bold start.
I just want you to know that I hope you're always remembered for that line. The thing is, we know that the reason the tone changed so much was that Warner Brothers and everybody else connected to like promotion needed Batman to be more toyetic.
Check out all of these shows and more on the We Made This podcast network.